I know, I'm sorry, I know it's been a long time. We're finally going to give you an update. I just wanted to start by going through where we're at on the bike. A lot's changed since the last video. Obviously we fitted the intercooler then. Since that we've also upgraded the fuel pump, and we've also fitted a standalone ECU, and we're using a Fueltech FT600. At the time, obviously everyone knows that there was no flashing software available. Willich and Brentune have all come out with their versions of software upgrades and the ability to reflash the ECU. The reason we've gone for a standalone is just basically it's a lot more user-friendly to make the changes that we want to make. So for example, if we want to go between pump fuel or E85, it's just a matter of pushing a button on the dash. Can have multiple maps in it. This kind of upgrade is not for everyone. It's an expensive upgrade, and especially because of what we had to do to fit this to the bike. I'll run through all that in a moment. We've also upgraded the fuel pump. When adding supercharger gears to the ZH2, you can go as high as stage 2 in the supercharger gears, and the bike will be making around about the 250 horsepower mark. Above that, the factory fuel pump starts to struggle. So we've currently got stage 3 gears in this bike, and so we've put our fuel pump upgrade in there, which has a rising rate regulator. I will go into a bit more detail about that. We've also got a video on our YouTube channel showing the H2 version of it. It's basically the same pump. There's a few differences between the two. But yeah, that's the upgrade for the fuel system. We've also fitted the H2 single-sided swing arm on this bike, and just to see how it all looked and went, it's a very straightforward fitment. It uses a combination of the ZH2 swing arm pivot and spacers and the H2 swing arms pivot and spacers. You have to use the H2 ABS sensor and the longer rear brake line and a ABS tone ring, because the tone ring on the H2 has a different number of teeth, and then it throws an error on the ECU. So we make a tone ring that's a swap for these. Other than that, if you find yourself a second-hand H2 swing arm, can't be an SX, it's got to be an H2, because the SX doesn't have the pocket here for the shock. But yeah, if you find yourself a second-hand H2 swing arm, you need the whole thing, including the linkage down there, the knuckle. It uses our dog bones, but it uses the H2 knuckle, and obviously the chain guard and hugger and everything. This is our drop-in fuel pump for the ZH2. It uses a AEM 340 litre an hour fuel pump and has a built-in rising rate regulator. It has a boost signal that goes to this line. It has a hose that runs to the plenum, so it references boost. Normally this has a gauge that sits here, but I've got a sensor on this one because we have an input on the Fueltech ECU to read fuel pressure. But normally there's a gauge here, and you set your base pressure by adjusting this screw. This is a lock nut. You just undo that lock nut and you adjust that screw, watch the pressure on the gauge while the pump's running, and set whatever base pressure you're looking for. I set this to about 40 psi. And then for every pound of boost in the plenum, this will raise the fuel pressure 1 pound. It works very well. It's how the turbo cars and have been doing it for years. This way, I think, is the correct way to do it. As I mentioned, we went with the standalone Fueltech ECU. The reason for this is because it gives us the ability to change and tune a lot more easily than reflashing the stock ECU. We originally were going to use their mid-range ECU, which is the FT550. This one's the FT600, but then we realised that wasn't going to actually run the bike. This bike uses a different kind of cam sensor to a normal bike, and it wasn't going to work, so we had to upgrade to the FT600. Fitting this ECU wasn't without challenges. As you can see, there's still a bit of wiring here that needs to be cleaned up, but we had to make the fitment a straightforward thing. We didn't want to have to cut and chop up the original wiring on the bike, so what we actually made was a patch harness that connected into the connector of the OEM ECU. So the original harness comes up and normally plugs in, the ECU normally sits in here, and the connector plugs onto that, and we made a part that would be replacing what the normal ECU would be. The problem is that is a proprietary connector. It's not something that anyone's ever seen. It's very similar to other connectors, but it's not exactly the same. So we actually had to make our own connector that would plug into the factory harness. That was a bit of a mission, but since we've got that all working, we now have a patch harness that is now plugged into the ECU. There's also a couple of things I want to put out there, that there's a lot of misinformation getting around on the internet about the quality of the components in the ZH2 engine compared to an H2. People saying that the H2's got forged internals and this doesn't, and blah blah blah. It's incorrect. I'll give you an example of this, and I'll come around and show you. This is a H2 piston, and this is a ZH2 piston. As you can see here, they are both cast pistons. They are very similar in their design, but the H2 is not forged, it's cast. The difference here on the top is because the compression ratio is different on the ZH2, so the machining looks a bit different on the top. They use the same rings, same material, both cast. The other thing that is often misquoted is that the conrods. The conrods in both engines are the same part number. So they both have this strengthening rib. They're both made of the same material, same part number. One of the other things that is also misquoted is the valve train. So both the H2 and the ZH2 use exactly the same part number valves in the motors. The heads are a different design. The H2 has an oval port exhaust port and larger inlet ports, and obviously it uses a larger throttle body. But the valves themselves are identical between the models, same as an SX. The other thing is the valve springs. The valve springs and the retainers are different on the H2, and Kawasaki has obviously done this because the H2 is designed to rev higher, so they have a heavier valve spring, a stronger valve spring, and they have a more lightweight retainer, so that you don't get any valve bouncing or valve float issues at high revs. Other than that, they are virtually the same motor. They both have cassette type gearboxes, the cranks, everything, it's all identical. The primary drive on the H2 is different to the ZH2 and the SX, but this is all just because of the intended use of the bike. It's not because the parts are weaker or stronger. Okay, so let's start by doing a couple of pulls on the dyno, and then we'll see where the power's at. I think the last time with the intercooler we were at about 215 odd horsepower on this dyno. So let's do a run and we'll see where the power's at, and then we'll have a bit more of a discussion then. So 244 horsepower is very good. That's like 30 horsepower more than we had previously, and that comes down to the aftermarket ECU and the ability that we have to keep the throttle open all the way through the rev range. So 30 horsepower increase just by doing that. And so this is what the figure is on my dyno. I'll show you a comparison power figure. This is what a Dynajet dyno would read. To be honest with you, I think that's probably a little bit generous. Generally, a Dynajet dyno reads about 10% higher than mine, so I think that figure would probably be closer to about 265 horsepower. That was just to give you a bit of a comparison. Anyway, let's get back to here. The next step is to put our Vandemon exhaust on, which we've got over there, and we'll do another run. I think at this power level we're starting to see a bit of a restriction in the exhaust. It's still got the standard cat in the exhaust. The Vandemon is a lot more free flowing, so we'll put that on and see what kind of improvement we get. We've got our Vandemon exhaust here, which we've already modified with the EGT bungs so that we can run our EGT sensors on it. Full titanium exhaust, very nice quality. So let's get that fitted up to the bike and we'll see what kind of difference it makes. What's 3 seconds later for you is a couple of days later for me. Anyway, I've fitted it all up. It just took me a couple of days to get around to filming some more for you. Anyway, I've started the bike and ran it for a little bit, and you can see that we've started to season those headers. They're starting to change colour. I've also fitted one of our windowed clutch covers so you can see how they look on the bike. And you'll notice that we've taken the pillion peg off. The muffler mount is no longer required with this style of exhaust. I've put the preload adjuster here for now. I'll change that. I'll just find a better spot for it. But the can sticks out a little bit further than I would have thought, but obviously this is designed for a double-sided swing arm, so it needs the clearance. So I'm not going to change it because I might put the double-sided swing arm back on. I'll start it up and give you a bit of a listen to how it sounds. And we'll do a run on the dyno and see what kind of difference it makes. Well, that's kind of disappointing, isn't it? So we didn't really pick up any power, and looking at this, I don't think the exhaust system is our issue. I think that it's fuel related, and the roughness of this graph is giving me an indication that maybe the ignition system is struggling a bit. And the problem with pump fuel is that you can't put enough ignition timing in. Our ignition timing is kind of low, and I can't increase it so much because of the quality of the pump fuel. Without getting too deep into it, I think what's happening is the ignition system is struggling. I've got an igniter with the standard ignition coils, and I think that kind of setup, it doesn't have a CDI, and I think that kind of setup with boost it's not ideal, and especially with the revs that we're seeing. So I've got a plan on what we can do. I think what I might do next is put some E85 in the bike and see if we can improve that power figure. Oh, and one other thing I'm just going to mention, because I've got to change the gear ratio on this dyno, because the bike's revving to 12,500 and it's only reading, it's not even reading 12,000. So I'm going to just change the tacho setting on the dyno. So the next runs will probably, you'll see them run out further, but that ties in better with what's on the actual bike. Just thought I'd mention it. Wow, that's, what a pickup. Like that is, so what I've done is I've gone to E85, made the fuel corrections, and we've started adding a bit of timing. I've added about 3 degrees of timing, and it's definitely liking it. It's picking up, and you know, we've just picked up 40 horsepower. So I'm just going to try increasing, giving it a little bit more timing up top, and see what kind of gain we get. Wow, 316 horsepower and 140 foot-pounds of torque. I'm stoked with that. That's unbelievable. What a difference some E85 fuel made. Looking at the graph and how smooth it is now, I can definitely see that the ignition system was struggling before trying to ignite the pump fuel. I don't know if I got that point across before, but I kind of want to give you an explanation on what's going on. When you advanced timing in the motor, you are making the ignition, you're making the spark plug fire earlier in the combustion cycle. So in regards to that, the piston is further down the cylinder, and that means that there's less cylinder pressure for it to have to work against, if you like, to create the spark. Obviously, as you can imagine, when you have a lot of boost in a motor, there's a lot of compression, and it's very hard for that spark to spark and ignite. So having, if you can advance the ignition further, then it doesn't have to work as hard. We're still using the standard coils, and we're using just an igniter that is, you know, designed to fire them. I have got aftermarket parts on order. They've been on order for 6 months, and because of everything, they just haven't come in. So I'm just happy that this worked. By, you know, running E85, we were able to, you know, advance our ignition timing considerably and make it fire better than on pump fuel. One other thing I forgot to mention before when I was talking about the comparison between the H2 and the ZH2 parts, and even the SX, is the supercharger. The supercharger on all models is the same supercharger. The only difference between them is the front cover. On the SX green, the H2 and the ZH2 both have a red front cover. They've got slightly different bolt patterns, where the ram tubes bolt on, but internally it's the same supercharger. They've got the same wheel, same size wheel, same bearings. It's all exactly the same. So there's no reason why this motor shouldn't make similar power to an H2. And to be honest, I think it makes better mid-range power because of the high compression ratio. Just something that I thought I'd share with you guys. Okay, so that's where we're going to leave it today. Over 70 horsepower pickup. I mean, you know, that's just incredible. I can't wait to ride the thing. I'm just going to put it back together and go and ride it. Probably go and do a night at the drags and see what kind of times I can run. That'll be a challenge with that much horsepower, but let's yeah, we'll go and see what we can do. And we've got more upgrades planned for the bike. This is definitely not the end by any means, but we've got some other projects that we're going to start on as well, and we'll have some more videos coming out with those very soon. Alright, thanks for watching, guys. Stoked.